Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a fascinating request that it really takes us deep into the architectural blueprints of narrative, specifically how to construct a truly compelling fictional cosmos. We have a listener who is designing their own comprehensive mythology for a long-form story, and they asked us to dive deep into sources that define mythology and, offer a structural playbook for creation.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't simply about providing inspiration or, cool names for gods. We are analyzing the functional components of belief systems. We're looking at what narrative requirements must be met for mythology to resonate deeply with the human mind. We are really treating mythology as a complex piece of engineering.
Absolutely. So our mission today is rigorous, and it's focused entirely on practical construction for you, the world builder. We need to extract the core requirements for compelling myth. What fundamental purpose must a myth serve for the people in your world? What structural models, from, say, the rigid Greek hierarchy to the chaotic, fluid Hindu cycles, work best to generate conflict? And critically, how do we handle tricky topics like divine morality and the source of a god's power without relying on tired, exhausted cliches that just break the narrative immersion?
Right. This is about understanding the inherent human need for narrative structure to explain the unexplainable. The sources provide a really solid foundation for critical thought, moving beyond the simplistic idea that a myth is just something untrue or historic. We need to define it as a living, functioning belief system.
And we've got some incredibly juicy topics coming up that directly relate to your fictional design challenge. We'll explore why integrating dispute into your structure is essential, why the commonly used gods need followers to maintain power trope is narratively deficient and should be avoided at all costs, and most importantly, why sometimes the unexplained, mysterious, cosmic evil, the kind that asks for nothing, is the most enduring and terrifying kind. Let's start with the foundation, defining what we're actually
doing.
So when most people hear the word mythology, they immediately think of stories that are quaint, old, and, well, demonstrably false.
Yeah.
The stuff you find in a dusty textbook on it.
Right.
Our source material immediately pushes back against this simplicity. It points out that this common usage creates a messy and, frankly, arbitrary distinction between what we label mythology, like Greek or Norse tradition, and what we label religion,
Like Christianity or Hinduism.
Exactly.
That distinction is entirely artificial, and it's often culturally biased. Religion is frequently defined by its current adherents as true, while everything else is just, relegated to myth.
But the moment you start applying that metric, the boundaries just completely collapse.
They do. The academic distinction breaks down when you realize there are still active modern worshippers of Greek deities like Aphrodite and Ares today. These aren't just historical relics. These are active, present belief systems for small but, existing communities.
So we can't define mythology purely by its perceived truth value.
Or its popularity.
Right, or we'd have to constantly shift the definition based on census data. It makes no sense.
Absolutely. And the source argues that this false separation largely stems from the introduction of the word theology. Theology seems to elevate certain belief systems, particularly monotheistic ones, to a level of academic seriousness. It implies truth.
And everything else gets pushed aside.
Meanwhile, academic discussions about the pantheons of ancient cultures are just casually labeled mythology, which often feels to the followers of those traditions like their practices are being subtly sidelined.
As just fun things to study rather than serious spiritual topics.
Yeah, okay.
That framing is so important for you as the listener because when you're building a fictional world, you need to ensure the beliefs of your characters feel serious to them, regardless of what the reader ultimately is. You need an umbrella term that respects all these traditions equally, whether they're followed by billions or they're relics of an ancient past.
Precisely. And that leads us to a working definition that covers all these belief-based narratives. The source frames mythology as an umbrella term encompassing all religious stories and cultural narrative, regardless of individual belief, historical context, or present popularity.
Okay, so if truth value isn't the core requirement, then what is? What is the essential engine that drives the creation and the proliferation of a myth?
The core requirement is purpose. Mythology refers to widely spread, preferably cultural beliefs and tales that exist primarily to explain the unexplainable. And they usually do it through supernatural phenomena. This mechanism, filling a knowledge gap, is what gives the narratives their inherent power and longevity.
This makes perfect sense historically. If you think about ancient civilizations where knowledge was limited, the gaps were just vast. Mythology was a functional tool for survival and comprehension.
In ancient times, those gaps were physical and immediate. Myths were needed to explain fundamental natural phenomena. Why does the sun rise and set in a predictable cycle? Why does the wind blow? Where do specific features of the landscape come from?
Or why does that dangerous animal behave in that very specific way?
The mythology was a precursor to science, providing a coherent narrative where none exist.
But the sources bring up an important modern concept, often called the God of the gap. Science has successfully filled many of the gaps, right? We have meteorology, gravity, evolutionary biology. But this doesn't mean the need for mythology vanished.
Not at all. The physical gaps have shrunk, but the existential gaps remain immense. Science has yet to definitively answer the fundamental questions that affect human purpose and action.
Like what happens after we die?
Or where did the universe, existence, and consciousness itself originate? These are questions that require a supernatural or at least a narrative explanation, and there are the precise domains where modern mythology, both real and fixed, steps in to provide structure.
This brings us to the core structural requirement for you as you design your fictional. The mythology must serve a reason for the inhabitants of that world to believe and follow it. It can be entertaining, sure, but fundamentally it must be fulfilling. It must fill a hole.
It's a structure of sustenance. The most successful mythologies provide an explanation, or a moral compass, or guiding principle, especially when people are in times of great uncertainty or crisis. The source points to anecdotal examples of people, like former addicts or those facing drastic life changes, who find new spiritual paths that act as a powerful organizational framework for their lives.
So the myth provides hope,
which is often more valuable than food or water.
It's a survival mechanism, a framework for getting through chaos. And sometimes that framework manifests in the most wonderfully specific way. It anchors the sublime actions of the gods to the observable facts of the mundane.
Yes. Look at the two classic explanatory examples the sources give us. Take the Greek story about Ares, the god of war, who cursed one of his soldiers for sleeping on the job and transformed him into a chicken. This myth now explains why roosters crow every morning.
It's a warning.
It's a constant feathered warning to ensure no one sleeps on the job, lest they face Ares' wrath and become an eternal, squawking reminder.
That story is so effective because it ties a divine mandate directly to an observable everyday fact. It makes the world feel governed, and it provides a clear, tangible consequence for a specific behavioral failure. But I have to ask, does relying on those simple, anecdotal explanations like the rooster or the squirrel lines risk making the mythology feel trivial or, I don't know, childish to a modern reader?
That's a fair challenge. But the power isn't in the simplicity. It's in the memorability and the relatability. In the original context, these stories were not trivial at all. They were foundational. Consider the explanation in the Ramayana for why squirrels have 3 distinct lines on their back. The story explains that Lord Rama drew his fingers across the creature's back as a blessing.
So it's a mark of divine favor.
A cherished cultural touchstone. It takes an unexplainable detail of nature and turns it into something every child can see and touch. For you as the world builder, these are essential narrative mechanisms. They connect the vast, unknowable divine world to the small, recognizable human experience.
Beyond just explaining nature or providing a moral anchor, fictional mythologies show us how belief systems can be cynically created or manipulated to manage population, particularly those desperate for hope and order in a desolate world.
This is where myth moves from explanation to a powerful social tool, or even a weapon. When external structures fail, government, science, infrastructure people will cling to the most compelling narrative available, especially one that promises hope or security.
Let's look at the fantastic example from Mad Max, Fury Road. The villain, Immortan Joe, doesn't rely on money or fear alone to motivate his army. He uses a manufactured religion heavily derived from Norse mythology to inspire his war boys to commit total self-sacrifice.
He takes the core Norse concept of Valhalla, an honorable warrior's afterlife, and twists it into an immediate motivation for self-destruction.
Witness me.
Right. The war boys willingly drive explosive vehicles into danger, blowing themselves up, because they genuinely believe that their instantaneous death in battle guarantees them a glorious afterlife in Valhalla. They're completely invested in the myth he created to fill the existential void of their apocalyptic existence.
They're so desperate for hope in that wasteland that they accept a narrative that dictates their own death. It just shows the acute need for belief in a crisis and the absolute power of the narrator. Immortan Joe is the ultimate example of a successful, if fictional, mythmaker.
And this concept echoes in other fictional worlds focused on societal collapse. Think of the Book of Eli. The entire plot hinges on the villain's obsession with obtaining the Bible. He doesn't necessarily seek salvation. He seeks control.
Control over the foundational myth.
Exact. In a post-apocalyptic, desolate world, whoever controls the tech, whoever can twist and interpret its words, can control the populace who desperately seek guidance. The myth is the key to social engineering.
Even in high-concept space opera, this narrative control is critical. Look at the moment in Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith. The Emperor Palpatine doesn't use a lightsaber or an armada to turn Anakin Skywalker to the dark side.
He uses a story.
He uses narrative. He leverages the mythos of Darth Plagueis the Wise, the Sith Lord, who could supposedly conquer death.
He provides provides Anakin with the exact narrative hook he needs to justify his turn toward evil, the hope that he can save his wife. The quote, "Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" isn't just dialogue. It's the revelation of a deep, secret mythological structure, the history of the Sith, that grants Anakin the justification and the means he hopes to overcome his most profound existential fear, loss.
For you, the takeaway is crystal clear. Your fictional myth should not only explain the world, but actively drive the motivations and justifications of your main characters.
It has to be functional.
We've established that our fictional mythology needs purpose and must fill an existential hole for the people. Now let's get into the structural blueprints. If you're building a pantheon of gods, you need proven models to draw from. And comparing real-world mythologies reveals structural differences that are far more valuable than just, observing similar gods between neighboring cultures.
Exactly. When you look at the enduring structures of existing mythology, you realize there is no single best way to organize the divine realm. The way the gods are arranged, their hierarchy, their mortality, and their relationship to the world varies dramatically, and each variation provides a distinct blueprint, complete with built-in narrative tension to use.
The first and most familiar model is the Greek pantheon. This is the classic, clear, and highly centralized hierarchy. It's defined by generational overthrow, Uranus overthrown by Cronus, Cronus overthrown by Zeus. But once established, Zeus reigns supreme over the heavenly gods from Mount Olympus, a clean, rigid, and well-defined family monarch.
The Greek structure is great for clear-cut, if very petty, drama. Everyone knows their place, even if they resent it. But immediately, the Norse pantheon offers a far more interesting blueprint by breaking the mold of absolute divine power. For one thing, Norse gods are not actually immortal in the same way. The source emphasizes that they can be killed and they can age.
They need the magic apple.
Their eternal youth and vitality are maintained only by continually eating magic apples grown by the goddess Iritun.
That single detail is a complete game changer for narrative state. It injects a constant underlying vulnerability in the lives of the gods. If the apples disappear, or if the gods stop eating them, they're susceptible to the same mortal constraint.
Which makes their inevitable destruction at Ragnarok not just a prophecy, but a believable, impending reality.
And the structure is different too.
Moreover, the Norse structure is organized by groups rather than a strict individual hierarchy. While we focus on individuals like Odin and Thor, the divine structure was really defined by two warring factions, the Aesir and the Vanir.
The gods of war and the gods of nature.
Right. The Aesir were largely the gods of war, rulership, and order, and the Vanir were the gods of nature, fertility, and wisdom.
This sounds far more politically complex. It's not just a family squabble, it's a cold war.
Precisely. The two factions fought a massive destructive war until they realized the cost was too high and brokered a difficult peace, exchanging hostages like Freya and Njord. The source material frames this dynamic brilliantly. The Aesir were the badasses, the powerful warlords, and the Vanir were the hippies, focused on esoteric knowledge and nature.
So they were autonomous groups in a state of tense coexistence.
And that coexistence creates inherent narrative tension that you can bake right into your fictional world.
Then we move to Egyptian mythology, where fluidity and politics reign supreme. The hierarchy was constantly changing, often dictated not by divine right, but by the whims of the reigning pharaohs.
In Egypt, the divine hierarchy was highly politicized and highly localized. Pharaohs themselves could be deified during their lifetimes or immediately afterward.
So a new human on Earth could instantly shift the power dynamics of the gods above.
It was a constantly shifting, centralized council where power flowed from the mortal ruler upward to the divine council. A very high-stakes system if you're interested in the intersection of faith and governmental power.
And finally, we have the ultimate non-linear structure, the cyclical model of the Aztec and Hindu mythology. These are defined by destruction and rebirth.
This model uses deep time as its organizing principle. The Earth is utterly destroyed and then subsequently reborn in these immense cycles, often every millennium or more. The Aztecs believed that a new set of gods accompanied each cycle of creation.
A kind of constant divine turnover.
Right, and the purpose of their mythology was often to understand which cosmic cycle they were currently in and how they might appease the current iteration of the gods to delay the inevitable destruction.
Of all these structural models, the source cites Hinduism as arguably the most challenging and yet the most accommodating for a writer, due to its profound, multi-layered complexity and its fundamental allowance for continual added.
It's often described as the most fan-friendly structural model.
Why does it earn that reputation?
It allows for incredible depth without ever having to invalidate previous stories. The structure is built around a high trinity, the Trimurti, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. These three exist above a significant rank of other deities led by Indra, who in turn manage lower ranks of local and regional deities.
The whole system is tiered.
But the power isn't static, and that tiered structure allows for a constant relationship between the divine and the mortal.
The avatars.
Exactly. The members of the High Trinity frequently descend as humans, as avatars, to interact directly with the world, often retaining their power and superiority over all other rank, even in human form. This structural mechanism, the descent of the god, means the divine can intervene directly and meaningfully without breaking the rules of the cosmos.
And the fluidity continues into local practices, which is where the fan-friendly aspect really shines.
Absolutely. The system is incredibly accommodating. Regional and village deities, or even newly introduced philosophical concept, can easily be incorporated and explained away as being a specific avatar or manifestation of one of the high gods.
It allows the system to grow and adapt seamlessly,
Absorbing local traditions and stories without ever invalidating the core lore. It's a mythology built to evolve.
However, the source also highlights that this internal flexibility breeds internal. You mentioned there's no single definitive version.
That's the most fascinating part for a writer. The very structure generates tension. Rival groups constantly argue over fundamental cosmic truth.
Are all the gods actually aspects of Shiva?
Right, or are they all different versions of Vishnu, or are they all distinct deities entirely? It's a permanent, multi-perspective cosmic debate embedded right in the structure.
That is contrasted so sharply with a monotheistic system, which has fewer internal structural.
Yes. In a system like Christianity, the focus is on one singular God. The fight remains localized around theological nuances, the nature of Jesus, the role of the Holy Spirit.
The structural tension is microscopic.
It's focused on interpretation. In Hinduism, the structure itself is designed for multiplication and evolution, giving you as a writer immense latitude to define internal conflict.
Let's move to application. We've seen that systems with built-in conflict, like the Norse Aesir and Vanir, are inherently more interesting than rigid, peaceful hierarchy. So, if you're building a world, integrating dispute right into the core structure of the god hierarchy makes your job exponentially easier.
It relieves you of having to manufacture a reason for the gods to fight. If you have a stable, monolithic heavenly hierarchy that is always in total agreement, your conflicts must always come from external forces,
Which often feel generic, a human villain, a demon, or some abstract force of evil.
But if the conflict is internal, the stakes are exponentially higher and more dramatic.
This led us to develop a hypothetical model based on the sources that integrates these internal tensions while avoiding the family cliché. I like the idea of a high heavenly god who is functionally the chairman of the council, but not necessarily leader.
So he's not an absolute ruler.
No. A desirable system would have maybe 4 to 6 different groups of equally powerful gods defined by their domain. So you have your heavenly gods, war gods, underworld gods, ocean gods, and so on. And they are not subservient to the high heavenly god, but instead maintain an uneasy peace enforced by mutual destruction.
That structure is effective because it immediately solves the problem of absolute power you find in the Greek model. You have established power bases that are functionally separate and could become antagonists at any moment over specific domain.
A war god trying to colonize an ocean god's territory.
Or an underworld god trying to extend his influence into the mortal realm.
Exactly. This allows the internal disputes to feel monumental and political rather than just personal and petty. And crucially, it allows a fan base, or in your case, the audience, to pick sides.
Team war gods versus team underworld gods.
You're not forced to root for the static high god. It's more dynamic.
When designing the actual deities within those structures, the sources suggest there are 2 highly successful models, and the best fiction often finds a way to use them in tandem.
We have the loosely defined teams model, the petty gods on equal footing, and the unknowable beings model.
Yes, the unknowable being. These are vast mystical deities whose motivations are so grand or so alien that they create overwhelming mystique and terror. Think of the high Hindu trinity, especially Shiva, whose ultimate goals are dissolution and creation simultaneously.
Or the entities of H.P. Lovecraft's Cosmos.
The source holds up Warhammer 40k as having one of the best contemporary Cthulhian-style mythology, primarily because their gods of destruction overlap with the most mundane, everyday human behavior in a horrifying way.
Let's spend some time on that because it's a brilliant blueprint.
Warhammer 40k utilizes the concept of the Chaos God, massive entities who live in a metaphysical realm fueled by raw human emotion. These gods are personifications of fundamental human excess. Horn is the god of blood and war. Tzeentch is the god of change and ambition.
Nurgle is decay and despair, and Slanesh is excess and pleasure.
And the terrifying implication is that ordinary, sometimes even positive human action feed these cosmic horrors.
Exactly. If you are extremely ambitious and you pull an all-nighter to get a promotion, you are unknowingly seen. If you go to the gym and work out too hard, obsessed with physical conflict, you are essentially worshiping Khorne unironic.
The mythology states that the chaos gods were created by the collective emotional energy of trillions of sentient beings.
That is a system where the mundane fuels the sublime horror. It links the Cthulhian unknowable scale of destruction directly to the choices and behavior low.
This creates mystique, which is the key ingredient. The mystery of Cthulhu not knowing what he wants, only that he exists and his existence is terrifying, is fundamentally more compelling and unsettling than the petty squabbles in Greek or Norse,
which can sometimes feel predictable.
The best fictional models, like the Hindu system we discussed, find a way to merge these two models.
They absolutely do. Hinduism features the petty gods like Indra and the Asura, who have constant disputes, lusts, and personal issues. But these lesser disputes exist under the shadow of the big three Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, who are vast, mysterious, and whose motivations are cosmic.
Their actions are interpreted as grand moral tests or cosmic sports, but their ultimate massive purpose remains ambiguous and hard to grasp.
You get the interpersonal drama for entertainment.
But the overarching, unknowable horror for the mystique is the best of both worlds.
Now, despite the brilliance of that hybrid model, we still have to acknowledge the one conflict blueprint that dominates almost everything.
The family dispute.
Why are nearly all successful mythologies built upon gods who are siblings, cousins, or parents?
As we touched on earlier, the reason is threefold. First, cosmogony often dictates. If the gods evolved from a singular entity like chaos or a primal void, they are naturally going to be family. Second, having a conflict between an all-powerful god and a fragile mortal human, well, it lacks any real tension. Conflict must happen among equals to raise the stakes.
And the third reason, which is perhaps the most difficult to avoid in fiction, is relatability. Everyone understands the complex, the jealousies, the arguments that happen within a close family unit. It's a low-effort narrative theme that instantly connects with the reader's own experience.
However, the source material argues that relying on the same tired family cliché, another Zeus cheating story, another Cain and Abel scenario, it just cheapens the mythology. Enrichment comes from going deeper, adding nuance, or being more realistic about the dynamics of justice and fairness, not just lust and envy.
We need differentiation. Not every myth needs a battle or a dispute. Let's return to that beautiful counterexample from Hinduism.
Yeah.
The story of Yama Dharmarja, the god of justice and death, interacting with the mortal woman.
This story is powerful precisely because it avoids the cliché. Yama Dharmarja, whose name translates to Yama the Justice King, is not a chaotic, petty Greek god. He's the embodiment of cosmic fairness. Savitri pleads for her husband's soul back, and Yama grants her 3 boons, one of which Savitri cleverly uses to ask for her own children.
And Yama realizes that since she is already walking with him, and she asks for children, he has to restore her husband to life so that she can fulfill the boon.
It's a story defined by intellect, justice, and negotiation, not brute force or sexual conquest.
It's just a conversation between a woman and a god, but it shows the enduring power of human love and divine commitment to fairness. It felt real and deeply human, which is a rare feat for a story involving a death.
It demonstrates that the conflict can be conceptual and moral, not just interpersonal and sexual.
Moving into the philosophical domain, morality. Most mythologies are inherently moralistic stories used to convey right and wrong, but too often they rely on 2 specific lazy tropes: the villain seeking power or the villain trying to avert a prophecy. The source critiques the reliance on prophecy as utterly boring for the world.
It creates a massive narrative problem, the debate of fate versus choice. If you rely on a prophecy, the villain often has no genuine choice but to be evil, making their motivations less interesting and complex. And established mythologies struggle immensely to resolve this paradox, often resulting in messy theological inconsistencies.
We see this struggle constantly in complex mythology.
Take Hinduism, for example. It is constantly restless. Sometimes Vishnu attributes misfortune to bad choices made by the individual karma, and sometimes he simply says, that's just fate. The cosmic clock is ticking.
It's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
It creates a frustrating, paradoxical, chronological mess where neither the reader nor the characters can truly discern who is responsible for the outcome, the individual or the divine plan.
If you rely on a prophecy, you're constantly fighting against the idea that the hero or villain is just a puppet on a string, which drains the story of dramatic. And as the source notes, how many stories rely on the prophecy that you're going to lose what you have, leading the king or father figure to immediately start killing.
It's a worn-out path that you should actively try to subvert.
So if we reject the prophecy and the simple power-hungry villain, what's left?
The most narratively successful models for evil are often forces of nature, whose motivations are mysterious, vast, or simply alien. The why is irrelevant, and therefore much more terrifying and existentially resonant.
The ultimate historical example is Apep the serpent in Egyptian.
Apep is a great celestial snake that embodies chaos and dissolution. He just keeps trying to eat the sun god Ra every single day, threatening to plunge the universe into eternal darkness.
He doesn't want money. He doesn't want the throne.
He has no tragic backstory. His singular goal is consumption and negation. The explanation for why he does this is irrelevant. He simply is a fundamental cosmic concept.
This adheres perfectly to the Lovecraftian principle. The source argues that the human imagination is usually far more interesting and terrifying than any explicit answer a writer could provide.
The moment you give cosmic horror a backstory, you reduce its scope. If you reveal the mechanism of cosmic evil, who created it, what its childhood was like, what its ultimate goal is, you rob it of its mystique and the terror of the unknown.
The human mind is wired to fear what it cannot comprehend.
And this allows for critical open interpretation, which is fantastic for a fictional world. If you create an evil force, like the mythical eclipse monster you mentioned, that wakes up every 1,000 years to block out the sun, you can leave the source of that evil open.
You don't have to know if it was created by a rival god or if it's just a fundamental flaw in the cosmic machinery.
That openness allows for divergent viewpoints within the fictional world. You could have cults in your world that genuinely believe the destructive eclipse force is actually in the right. They could view the gods who fight it as the true corrupting agent.
That moral ambiguity is often far more sophisticated than a simple binary good versus structure. Imperfect gods are appealing, but you as the writer must decide if their morality is defined and absolute or complex and ambiguous.
Leaving it ambiguous provides endless, sophisticated storytelling opportunity.
Okay, we must now address the biggest, most prevalent, and arguably most destructive cliché in modern fantasy world building. The concept that a god's power level is dictated by the number of followers they have. We are calling for this trope to be exiled from all fictional mythologies immediately.
I cannot stress this enough. It is the most narratively deficient trope in modern mythology, and it breaks the suspension of disbelief instantly.
The flaw is fundamental. It creates an immediate paradox.
A chicken or the egg causality issue.
Exactly. If the gods created humans, how did the creator god exist and possess the power to create the universe before anyone was there to worship him? Did he create the first 3 humans and then wait patiently for their first prayer before he could invent grass? It makes no sense.
Beyond the logical flaw, this dependency cheapens the concept of godhood. It makes gods reliant on people, robbing them of their inherent celestial power. They are reduced from cosmic architects to glorified, desperate politicians who need approval ratings to maintain their physical existence.
They become incompetent.
The source material is highly critical of films that rely on this, specifically calling out Wrath of the Titan. Zeus loses power because humans stop praying. Yet the same film requires the audience to accept that these same supposedly powerless Olympian gods managed to defeat the Titan, who had received absolutely zero prayer or worship in the first place.
The mythology just collapses under its own logic.
The dependency fundamentally contradicts the very definition of a god. Why did this trope become so popular in modern fantasy?
Because it's an easy way to give the mortal human characters agency.
Right. If the gods are struggling, the human protagonist suddenly has massive stakes, becoming the savior of the divine realm.
But there's a better model. There's a way to preserve mortal agency without cheapening divinity.
Absolutely. The favored model is establishing that gods have inherent foundational power. They are cosmic forces. They exist regardless of human belief. However, faith and worship enhance that power. Worship is an energy source, a booster shot, a form of spiritual currents.
But not the only source of their existence.
This distinction allows for rich narrative developments without sacrificing the inherent power of the god. You can have a god who is universally powerful, but temporarily weakened by lack of worship, perhaps limited in their ability to intervene directly in the mortal realm.
The source points to Rick Riordan's Trials of Apollo series as an example of this enhanced model working successfully. In that world, former Roman emperors manipulated widespread worship to elevate themselves to god status.
This showed that faith can be a powerful energy source, capable of raising a mortal to divinity, or perhaps powering a god's intervention.
But the pre-existing foundational Greek gods, like Zeus, had their power independent of the emperor's faith-fueled apotheosis.
Faith is a supplemental mechanism, not the necessary foundation of all godhood. You need to make this distinction clear in your rules of power.
We've established the rules. Let's look at some fictional mythologies that the sources praise for doing the heavy lifting right, for applying these principles.
One surprisingly deep mythology praised by the source is found in the Aragon book series by Christopher Paolini. Paolini successfully created deep, distinct mythologies for multiple races, the humans, the dwarves, the Urgals, all within the same world. And they feel organic because he gives them different cosmological origins and different rules of interaction.
But the brilliance, as you noted, is the intentional use of ambiguity. The main character initially encounters the dwarf religion and is highly skeptical. He views it as quaint tradition.
Yes, and then later, during a crucial dwarven crown ceremony, one of their gods briefly appears to crown the king and then just disappears. The main character, who is skeptical, and the reader, who is viewing it all as fiction, is suddenly forced to confront a massive question.
Which gods, if any, are real and which are merely stories?
That moment is narrative gold because it respects the reader's intelligence. It forces the audience to engage with the tension of belief, making the fictional world feel vast, unknowable, and potentially real.
It's a very effective literary device for myth.
Another success story is Star Wars, specifically praised for the mystery of the Force, particularly the arc added in the Clone Wars animated series, featuring the father, son, and daughter.
Ah, the Mortis art. These were beings literally made of the Force. They were personifications of its light side, the daughter, its dark side, the son, and the bound father.
That arc was an intellectual deep dive into the metaphysical structure of the Force itself, presenting it not as a biological function, but as a pure mystical archetype. The source notes this was a refreshing and welcome departure from the controversial science-based midichlorians explanation,
which felt cheap and reductive.
The Mortis arc satisfied the unknowable beings requirement far better than any scientific explanation ever could, giving the Force a true mythological foundation.
It turned the Force from a simple energy field into a cosmic, volatile family, but a family of pure concepts, not petty lust, allowing the mythology to achieve that sophisticated hybrid structure we admire.
Now, let's look at the excellent detailed concepts our listener provided, which illustrate how they have successfully applied many of these principles. They are creating a set of kingdoms with patron gods who are always coupled,
reflecting the Hindu idea that balance and harmony are necessary for stable power.
For instance, their war god focuses on the nasty, aggressive aspect of war, but he is paired with the goddess of fire and forges, who focuses on crafting the spoils of war and the rebuilding afterward.
It's a complete life cycle of conflict, not just simple destruction.
This duality is brilliant. It ensures that the divine system justifies a specific societal structure. Their most original concept, lauded by the source, is the mercenary kingdom. This kingdom is barren and lacks resources, so their primary trade is selling their warriors as mercenaries.
This is a perfect example of Rule 1. Fulfill a void. The war god couple serves explain and justify the entire culture. The people are a warrior culture who profit from war because they're god, a war god who profits from conflict, and a forge goddess crafts the wealth from that conflict, have established that cultural and divine precedent.
It's the ultimate expression of the idea that mythology defines culture rather than the other way around. The gods didn't just create the people. They created the justification for their most dominant and defining profession.
This makes the mythology indispensable to the fabric of the.
So synthesizing everything we've discussed, the structures, the definitions, and the common pitfalls, we can distill this into 4 core rules for the construction of your cosmos.
Rule 1. Fulfill a void. Your mythology must provide a compelling structural reason for people in that believe it. It needs to offer explanation, guidance, or critically hope in a destiny. If it doesn't serve a functional purpose, society, it will not resonate.
Rule 2. Be interesting over believable. This is so crucial for fiction. Entertainment is paramount. People will suspend disbelief for a great original story, but they will not suspend it for a cliché that is poorly executed or boring. Focus on unique concepts, not adherence to realism. You are building a cosmos, not writing a textbook.
Rule 3. Embrace moral ambition. Mixing your models, having your petty, squabbling domain gods alongside your vast, unknowable deities, is the most successful structural path. Leaving the motivation for cosmic evil open to interpretation, Lovecraftian style, is usually far more compelling than clearly defining heroes and villains. Imperfect gods are.
Rule 4. Avoid done-to-death cliché. We singled out 2 major culprits. The family dispute cliché should be reinvented or avoided entirely unless you can bring nuance like the Yamadharma story, focusing on justice, not jealousy. And above all, avoid the faith-based power system, where a god's power depends solely on the number of followers.
Use faith as an enhancer, an energy source, but never a power prerequisite. Give your gods inherent cosmic.
This deep dive has armed you with the principles needed to craft a cosmos that resonates deeply with that inherent human need for structure and explanation. We've covered everything from structural models like the Norse dichotomy and the Hindu cycle to exposing essential narrative pitfalls like the power paradox.
The true lesson we keep returning to is that while nothing is 100% original in the world of story, finding a unique, functional reason for your world system is the engine of a great. Make your conflicts internal, make your gods complex, and make sure their existence justifies the culture.
The inherent nature of humanity is to seek the light in the dark, to impose order on chaos. And as long as there's an existential crisis, people will turn to a guiding myth. That drive is what you must tap in.
And here's a final provocative. Mythology exists, playing the unprovide big global inequality. AI. We are forced to confront vast. What are the new gods?